So the issue with, and I can understand if you are convinced as an officer, it's a very big assumption to make, and not one that I think any officer wants to make, is to try to predict the future. He currently, Mr. Beard, is trying to figure out how he doesn't have to take this chick to jail because he believes that there is no possible further violence, or that she is not a threat to him moving forward, since she believes that she's the suspect, or he believes that she's the suspect. The problem with that is they need to be separated for the law to allow that. Utah law, and we did look this up, Utah law does have specific, and I believe Texas law is similar. If I can know that there's no possible further, typically the arrest is done to prevent further violence, at least for a 48-hour period or more, or at least buying you enough time to have a judge give a court-ordered protective order. In Texas, it's an emergency protective order, which is done in a criminal case. A restraining order is civil in Texas, for anybody that wants to know. That's something that takes like 30, just like an eviction, it takes a long time to do. Because they live in the same car, practically, and because they're out of state, they're both from Florida, it's highly unlikely that they got family. They haven't asked, that they have family or another place to go to. They're probably on limited means. These people are stuck with each other. They've already committed violence. Before officers interacted with them, they were clearly in a highly agitated state. They're still, even 20 minutes into this police investigation, in a relatively agitated state. How do I guarantee, as an advocate for the victim, which is the guy at this point, that no further violence occurs? This is the question they're being posed with. So we'll see how he navigates
See where this goes.
Yeah.
I'm getting angry too to the victim, which is him.
Right, and I'm getting conflicting stories about why they hit the curb up here.
What did he say why he hit the curb?
Well, I've watched, this is what I saw first. Saw him cross the double yellow. I was doing 42 miles an hour. I was, I don't know, probably 2 car lengths behind him, tapping my whales at him, trying to get his attention. They knew I was behind him. And then after he crossed the double yellow, he merged over into the right lane, and then out of nowhere, just boom, hit the curb.
So did he tell you why?
He said that she grabbed the wheel and turned it real hard. She said that she was hitting him in the arm. So
sounds legit. I mean, I'm sure if I'm driving and my arm's on the wheel and I'm getting hit in the arm, I'm probably pulling out the wheel.
So we'll pause this real quick. So we brought this up when we were talking about it the first time we watched it. The issue with that specific act in general is if I am not in a sound place of mind where I don't realize that hitting somebody who's driving a motor vehicle 40 miles per hour in the middle of a desert is a bad idea, I'm having to question where this person, and it's not that there's anything wrong with this person, but I have to, as an advocate for people, you're an advocate for the suspect just as much as you have to be an advocate for the victim. Should I leave this person in a position to possibly hurt themselves moving forward? In Texas, it's a notification of emergency detention. I'm not saying they should, it would be appropriate here because it wouldn't be. But if someone's doing something that would actively harm themselves or someone else, and it's possibly due to some level of emotional distress, whether it be acute or chronic, we got to start looking at maybe getting them, again, protecting them from themselves. There are specific powers enumerated in law enforcement in Texas that allows you to do that, but even in the spirit of the law and law enforcement, you have an obligation to do this. It's kind of, you'll see this a lot of times in traffic stops. This is why this primary officer's absolutely gold sticker, killing it today. He sat there and says, how do I protect this person from themselves and from me? Let's control the environment. Let's get people detained in a safe way. Let's get the keys out of let me take any opportunity this person has to do something stupid that's going to hurt. Because them running won't affect you as an officer. Them taking off and running into traffic, maybe they get hit by a car. That would really suck. And you should want to prevent that because ultimately your job is to protect life. And so these are the questions you need to be asking yourself. And when you're looking at an arrest decision here, and this is what they're contemplating, shouldn't this lean you in the direction of taking her into custody? You have PC for the arrest. You have clear, you could document, take pictures of his injuries, both based on both of what they said, and the witness, which corroborates both of their statements, says that she's the suspect. Even if you don't necessarily feel that there's a huge threat to his safety, maybe there's a threat to hers. Maybe she puts herself in a situation where she could be hurt. Kind of i.e. where this investigation kind of starts to go. Let's protect her from herself even though she's the suspect here. And that's kind of where my complaint started to become with this, because they started to just think, well, I don't want to get her in trouble. Mm-hmm. They started thinking about the legal or the inconveniences of having to be handled by the system and not ultimately protecting people. And that's kind of where this...
boy, I bet a lot of people would love to get that kind of consideration whenever they get stopped.
And again, I've had it to where I'll have teenagers that were fighting me over something. They get in a huge fight with their friends and they got, marijuana on them. So they take off and I catch them. And we're in the middle of a fight. And I know I got like 120 pounds on this poor kid, right? Mm-hmm. And he's not punching me. He's not kicking me, but he's not wanting to go to the ground. Now, I can sumo this guy to the ground, probably breaking an arm or something awful like that. Or I can hold him there. We had jiu-jitsu training. I can bring him to the ground and take him into custody as long as he's not a huge danger to me. As an officer that understands the ethics around your responsibility here, you have, even though this guy's clearly my suspect, he's clearly resisting arrest, I'm going to charge him for all these things. But I'm still trying to be an advocate for this guy. When I'm placing the handcuffs on, this guy be spitting, kicking, cussing, whatever. There's a way to apply handcuffs to minimize the amount of damage this might do to their wrist. Now, if they're pulling on them, I can't do anything about that. They're doing that to themselves. But making sure they're not too tight, making sure I'm double locking them, making sure all of these things are important because ultimately that's what you do in the job for. And like I said, you need to be an advocate for both parties here. Part of that advocacy is wondering what the long-term effects of your action or inaction might be. And that's where you start to get into this conversation of why you might have some people that complain about the culture in law enforcement, or why you might see these situations being evaluated differently. And again, nothing that they're doing is unlawful, but we got to think about the long term, like what's your thought process in making these decisions? And also for the public, why they make these decisions. It might seem that they might have hooked her up and then got all pissed off. Well, you arrested my girlfriend and that's kind of crappy. Look at her. And it's like, you got to look at all these considerations we're making. We're trying to protect people from themselves. Is it annoying to go to jail? Sure, I bet it is. But whether you're the victim or the suspect, we're trying to protect you from yourselves. And like that's kind of the nature of the beast with this kind of stuff. We'll keep going. We'll see how their Mr. Beard guy here does.
Of both, and usually the truth is somewhere in between. He's probably trying not to say that he hit her because he probably doesn't want her charged with assault, domestic assault. He probably would rather say she pulled the wheel than
he's trying to be cool.
Yeah. You know what I mean? So, fortunately for her, we cannot treat, just because he's bigger and stronger and even if he's not willing to press charges, we can't treat this differently than if it was a male on female violence.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. We're going to have to charge her, and we can do a citation if there's some arrangement that can be made to separate them, and then we have to let them know that there's no contact order in effect. And we have to let him know the only way to drop is to go into the police department during business hours and fill out a waiver, which, by the way, what's today? Thursday? So it won't be till tomorrow. I know, and they're till noon, I think. Yeah. Which I'm sure he's going to want to drop it.
Well, the other part of it is they said that they've been on 4 or 5 months that they've been living out of this van together.
Also, random aside, his gun has a goofy extended mag.
Ryan?
Just random. I'm a gun guy, so I noticed that.
Did you ask him yet to take pictures of him? Yeah?
No, I haven't done anything.
Gotta take pictures.
Unfortunately, in the state of Utah.
So pause it real quick. Everything Beard Guy said was 100% on point. He's thinking out loud, which I do. I'm a total weirdo, and I think out loud like that. But he walked through everything that they needed to do. And again, he's 100% right here. To this point, this investigation makes 110% sense. But again, if I'm being the advocate as officer here, I have an arrest for domestic assault. I don't know where else you could possibly take this. I don't think you have a DWI by any measure.
Well, to give you a hint, we're 24 minutes in, and it's an hour and 17-minute video, so you know this isn't as this isn't. This doesn't get as clean cut as
we have the benefit of hindsight, and so I'm not trying to criticize that these officers did. And again, they didn't do anything unlawful, nor do I think that I think they acted ethically when it comes to doing the job correctly. We start to run into a problem when they try to circumvent what's the obvious answer here.
Well, and I disagree a little bit, only in that I do think the bearded officer here came into this with a specific set of assumptions, a specific set of ways that he was going to handle this, kind of assuming who the suspect and the victim were, and then behaves in a way that makes it seem as though he is trying to create that outcome as opposed to just trying to figure out what that outcome was.
And I'll say this, I won't knock him for showing up and thinking, cool, this is a domestic, this is clearly my victim, this is clearly my suspect. But once you find out that's not the case, You need to treat it the same way.
He
Yeah.
has now articulated. We just saw him articulating exactly what happened.
She is the suspect for domestic violence. They have probable cause to believe that she committed domestic violence, domestic assault. They need to be treating him the same way they'd treat her if the shoe was on the other side of the foot, and vice versa. I don't know, and I don't want to make a conclusion. If the roles were reversed, my guess would be he would be in handcuffs. And they wouldn't be trying to navigate getting him out of that charge if that was the case. If she was sobbing like that, had the injuries and all that kind of stuff, I to play the devil's advocate here, I don't think it's too big of a stretch based on their disposition around this whole thing that he wouldn't already be in custody.
My guess is he would have been in handcuffs 15 minutes
and
ago.
That's in essence where the problem comes in. Is even if we're wrong, let's say they would have treated any domestic like this, let's say they treat every domestic like this, it still looks bad from the outside looking in. We don't get to know, and you're opening yourself up to this level of speculation. So just again, advice to my fellow cops that are out there, you got to think about this. As procedural justice is what saves your butt in the long run from this kind of stuff. So we'll keep playing this and see what goes on.
You don't have discretion on some things. Like, for
Agreed.
example, if I pull you over for speeding and I want to give you a warning, I can do that because it's under Class A, it's a Class B or under. If I want to give you warnings for all kinds of stuff, I can. But there's a few things I can't. When I say I, police, I'm not in charge of anything. One of the things that the state legislature doesn't give us discretion on.
I think it's interesting that this backup officer's doing all the explaining. I wonder if he's more senior. I don't know. If he's a more senior officer, he might take this. His attitude seems that way, and he's right in everything that he's saying. But I find it interesting that the primary officer's doing a lot less of the talking than this guy is. He's not wrong, and I think he's being perfectly professional in doing it, which I appreciate his transparency in it. Where we're not into the problematic part yet.
Yeah, no, so far this has gone exactly how, based on having filmed all these videos, I would expect this to go.
Like I said, I kudos to this police department because this is indicative of good training, good culture, and good ethics within a police department to have them interact with the public like this. Because this guy does look really gruff. This guy is acting kind of strange. He's acting kind of squirrely, but he's going through the trouble of explaining everything to him and speaking to him like a normal adult, which says everything you need to know. And again, this is how everyone should be treated by law enforcement, as long as they're being cooperative. If you're being combative, I'm sorry, you played yourself. But if you're cooperating with law enforcement, this is how your interaction should look. Also, to be fair, he's also speaking and being very complicit in the investigation. That helps.
So she's kind of in a tough spot. So unless you have an idea about how she could not go to jail and be separated, do you have friends in town? Somewhere she could stay?
I also don't have a problem with him trying to navigate getting resources to her to not take, because again, if these people aren't wanting to charge, if they're not wanting the police involvement, it's counterintuitive to try to do it. I've been in this situation plenty of times. With NEDs is a good example of this, where somebody had I've had a full-blown outcry statement where somebody says, I really don't trust myself staying at home. I really think I'm going to hurt myself. I show up and I have a family member that says, I'm willing to take care of these people and take them to the hospital in the morning. I sit there, have a conversation. You guys have a safety plan in mind. They didn't do anything. They didn't act on it. But I can't ignore an outcry statement. Without the family coming in and talking about a different way of doing it, I have all the authority to and technically, if I didn't feel assured enough to do it, it is my call and my discretion as to whether or not I agree to that safety plan or take them to a hospital to get psychiatric care. There is some level of discretion here. I'm not mad that he's advocating for it, but again, I'd be curious to see what the statistics are if you looked at how often this level of consideration is given to men versus women in this set of circumstances. We'll keep watching.
Tomorrow, because it's after 5, so offices closed. So you can go to the police department, fill out a waiver.
And I do like that he's explaining the process to them, because again, nobody knows if they don't do this all the time. We can skip through this.
He's just explaining all the stuff that we already talked about. Yeah.
He's being very thorough, which I think is good and professional.
Yeah. He's literally just explaining how he would go to pick her up, et cetera, but they're going to separate them, and they're trying to figure out whether or not there's a way that they can get, if they've got money for a hotel or somewhere for them to stay, for her to stay specifically, so that
So we'll pause it here. So there's a clause that we had in I had a senior officer that told me this one time. It's the smartest thing ever. If you're having to explain too much, you're probably not doing your job. If I have to put a bunch of call notes in a call that I'm not going to take a report on, I should probably take a report on this call. If I'm having to really stretch it to articulate my probable cause, I probably don't have probable cause. In this instance, if you're having to really stretch it for it to meet that criteria for a cite and release on this offense, you probably shouldn't be citing and releasing in this instance. Again, mitigating some sort of factor. Again, if she was pregnant or if maybe there was COVID. And again, both these people had a very specific, hey, I have somebody that can come pick her up. I don't care. We can go separate it. If it was an easy fix, yes, I have my own car. Yes, I can go somewhere. I have family down the street. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to expose everybody to COVID. Maybe you can explain that away, you know. In this instance, there's none of these stretches. These are very big stretches. There's officers offering to pay for hotel rooms to keep people from going to jail. Again, you're really stretching it to try to make it fit that criteria, which I don't agree with. So he's currently working to see if he can get her a hotel. Again, I'm not against this per se, but what I'm getting at is, are we advocating for the victim here? And this is really where, again, if the roles were reversed, would it, generally speaking, do we feel like we're ethically working on behalf of the victim here? Again, it's officer discretion. I'm not criticizing the decision. I just look at the totality of the circumstances here. And are we doing probably the safest decision moving forward? And this has nothing to do with the eventual outcome of these two people's relationship. This is really dealing with, you know, in the moment, how safe do I feel gambling on letting these people be left to their own devices? And should I have stepped in as law enforcement to try to do something? And it's a hard area. It's a very thick gray area. Again, we're not problematic yet. We're getting there. We're not problematic yet. But my question is, should you be trying this hard to not take someone to jail?
Should you have to try this hard to not take someone to jail?
That's what I'm getting at. Is like, if you're having to, would you go through all of this for anybody? Would you go through all of this for, again, if the roles were reversed, and I don't feel like that's the case, and you have to be self-aware enough to realize, oh, I might be doing this because she's a young female. You know, is that ethical? Is that moral? And is that not kind of betraying the trust that the public's kind of putting into you? So we'll see what they say here.
It would cause like a slap with you. And if you say you slapped me, we're aggressive person.
I believe he's explaining that she's effectively, they have PC to believe that she did commit a domestic assault. I actually like that he's also explaining this. He's not just acting and saying, because I said so. He's thoroughly articulating why he's doing stuff. And I think it's not done enough. Again, super kudos on Mr. Beard for going through the trouble of explaining the entire legal proceeding as to why and the reasoning behind why. Because I think it's important, because I think if someone knows the why, they're probably less, they're going to be less combative. They're going to be less whatever. I think it's a good thing. And it's professional. I think it's a professional courtesy to do to people. So. We can keep going. He's still talking to the hotel, trying to figure out. So we can pause it here. So the investigation's done at this point. We know everything we need to know. Now we're talking about the reasonableness of a detention. Typically on a traffic stop, there's no official amount of time, but generally speaking, for a traffic stop, if I know that I have probable cause for a crime, 45 minutes is about the cutoff before you start really reaching into, if I detain you for 2 hours over speeding, it's pretty unreasonable, and you have constitutional protections against that. If I already know I have a crime, and I'm keeping my victim now stuck here, despite the fact that I already know what my disposition should be, even though I might be trying to act in their best interest, and maybe let's say this did work out just fine, they were great afterwards, it's still unreasonable to expect, and it's unusual to have a detention for this long just because we're looking for a way out. Maybe let your victim go, hang out with your suspect, and then decide what the suspect is going to, either they're going to go to jail or they're going to go do whatever. All of that has to deal with the suspect. I understand in this instance that I think he wanted to give her the van, so maybe that's the reason why. But if that's the case, take the other guy away already to the hotel room and kind of figure that stuff out as you go. So we'll keep playing it.
Yeah, there's a lot of negotiating that happens in this portion of like who's going where, what's happening.
I figured I had to make sure I at least.
We can keep going.
And then let me see your hand. Is that?
Yeah. So here,
really good idea to take a picture of the hand. So the reason why, and you'll see this, they're trying to establish that there's no injuries to us. Because if you punch somebody, typically you're going to have cuts or bruises somewhere in your hand. Documenting, again, the absence of an injury is just as important as the injury actually being there. Because, again, it establishes the physical evidence of whether or not an assault actually occurred. I think it's super important. And, again, this officer's super sharp. You see he's shaking, he's still nervous.
I know you said this is from a wire, but I'm going to take a picture of it just in case, and I'll document that you're saying that's from a wire, not from her. It's just I want to document everything you want. And then your right arm.
Man, and nail marks that'll show up in full daylight like that. Pretty serious nail marks.
On the other arm, on your back, chest, anything like that.
Nothing on the side that wasn't facing her. Crazy.
You want to kind of tilt your head off to the right and look up this way? I don't know.
I need to skip this too. He's just documenting the injuries, which you need to do.
Yeah, and they check part.
The only way you know what she's attempting to do is by asking her. Right.
Okay, so we'll pause it here. So what this guy says, Mr. Beard here, Mr. Backup Officer, is he's trying to ascertain intent on a action, right? So an act is somebody that willingly, if I take producer Juan's arm here and make him hit me in the face, well, he didn't willingly do that. I forced him to do it. If I do it at gunpoint, he cannot be held culpable for his actions because the alternative's death. So that's pretty reasonable to assume he wants to live. That's unreasonable for me to ask him to choose death over doing something illegal. In this instance, it's my opinion here, and again, you can let the internet lawyers kind of argue about this. If the end result is an injury, I don't think that the intent, I don't know how you question intent if she says, yes, I hit him and he's injured by that hit. Well, I didn't mean to hurt him, but you did hurt him and you meant to hit him. It's not like you involuntarily swung at him. You voluntarily swung at him, and regardless of your intent, caused damage. If I randomly crank a desk pop off in the air, my intent wasn't to hurt somebody. So agreed, you can't say that convict me of murder, not even second degree murder, because I wasn't doing it in malice. But criminally negligent homicide, I'm absolutely guilty of because my intent is irrelevant. The same issue here, that the assault that causes bodily injury still occurred regardless of intent. You might be able to negotiate a lesser sentence, or you might be able to negotiate offensive provocative contact versus assault bodily injury. But either way, having the conversation about intent, in my personal opinion, is irrelevant. Because if she said I accidentally fell down and he fell down, if that was the conversation, that would make sense. If she jumped out to do a prank video and startled him and he hit his face on something, if that was the story, we'll establish that her intent was to scare him, not hurt him. This wouldn't fall under assault bodily injury. She said, I willingly hit him because I was upset. The result of that was bodily injury. I don't understand the argument for that, but we'll let the comment section argue about that.
Yeah.
Gabby, this is a very, very important question. How you answer this question is going to determine what happens next. But the only person who can answer this question is you. Think very hard before you answer the question. Do not quickly answer this.
So, if she's under arrest, let's say she's under arrest, I would give her a Miranda warning, right? Giving her, advising her of her rights and stuff like that. I can advise her of her rights if this was a consent to search, things like that. I don't necessarily have a problem with him advising her of her rights or the seriousness of that her statements have legal weight. My problem with the way that this question is asked is it's leading.
Mm-hmm. Very leading.
When you're leading into it, it's because you're trying to mine an answer out of somebody versus just have somebody answer truthfully. Mm-hmm. This wouldn't hold up. If I was a defense attorney, I would annihilate this question. Absolutely annihilate this question if this was trying to prove her guilt. Because we have to look at it that way. If I'm speaking on something, you are trying to, in essence, manipulate a party to say something a certain way, and I think that that's disingenuous to law enforcement objectives. My objective is to be an advocate for the victim who was over there. If he is victimized by something, the law is written in a way that everything I do now has to be in the interest of protecting that victim. By gaslighting the victim, by trying to talk the suspect out of a charge by finding some weird loophole on intent, I just find it very disingenuous, whether he's got a legal argument or not.
Yeah, this was the big thing for me. Is like, this seems very much like something for a defense attorney to do, not something for a police officer to be doing.
I agree.
This is beyond the scope of what law enforcement should be doing in this situation. Their job was done 20 minutes ago. Like, at this point, it's just figuring out who's going where and the logistics of that. There is no reason he should have been in the back of that, or in that car, in his patrol vehicle, looking up ways to try and find a way to weasel her out of a charge, out of a night in jail, out of whatever. That is for a defense attorney to do.
And to kind of give you the relationship of how this works, so law enforcement's job is to ascertain probable cause. I have probable cause to believe that a crime did occur. If Juan came to kill me, but I killed him first, I would be charged with murder. I did commit murder. My affirmative defense to prosecution is going to be that I was defending myself. If she was going to have an affirmative defense to prosecution, that is something that gets argued in the court of law. That is not something that gets argued in the street. So your job as a law enforcement officer, in my humble opinion, is to ascertain whether you have probable cause for an arrest, not guilt or innocence. That's where the issue becomes here. You are now becoming both the officer and the judge. You're becoming the officer and the attorney, and that's not your job. There's a reason why we separate this, because you don't know. They could have both lied about the whole thing. You don't know. All you have is probable cause to believe that something happened. You arrest based on that probable cause. Guilt and innocence is done in a completely different procedure that's designed to protect their rights, both the victim and the suspect. Here you are neglecting being an advocate for the victim because you are trying to weasel this potential suspect's prosecution to a charge. You're also, in a way, manipulating the suspect into answering in a certain way, which again, in this instance, in hindsight, put them in a very vulnerable position to be harmed either way. And then moving forward, if I talk somebody out of a charge now, that Class A might escalate into a felony. If they don't suffer a consequence now and they walk on it, there's potentially, again, recidivism, not in the sense that they're committing another crime, but that they're perpetrating violence on somebody else, or they're victimizing somebody else. It's the whole point of having laws. That's the whole point of having law enforcement. That's the whole point to all of it, is to create a consequence for what we deem as a society as,
unacceptable behavior.
Yeah. And so, in doing this, you are, in my opinion, and I'm not trying to condemn or absolve anybody from responsibility here, but you are circumventing that process. So this is my issue with the way that he's asking this question, but we'll see how it goes.
Think very hard. When you slapped him those times, were you attempting to cause him physical pain or physical impairment? Was that what you were attempting to do to him? What were you attempting to do? What was the reason behind the slapping and stuff? What was it you were attempting to accomplish by slapping?
I was trying to get him to stop telling me something.
Well, it doesn't sound to me like she attempted to injure him.
Pause.
Mm-hmm.
So, The question is never...
Did I get your attention without hitting you?
Yeah, crazy.
Did I get your attention without hitting?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I don't know how that happens. That's incredible.
So the issue with this is that results matter. My question as a law enforcement officer as it pertains to the offense is not whether or not the intent was to do harm, it's whether or not the act was knowingly and intentionally. The law specifically asks, did they knowingly and intentionally strike that person? Not whether they intended for harm, because let's say they did intend for harm but not death, right? And then the person dies. Does it matter that I didn't? The end result still matters. The charge wouldn't be assault bodily injury and then they just happen to die. The result of that would change that from assault bodily injury or ag assault to either criminally negligent homicide, maybe manslaughter, things of that nature, depending on what your state is. They have different flavors of what they call it. The intent versus the effect is irrelevant in the conversation for establishing PC for the arrest. Was the act itself intentional or not? The act here, by all accounts, by all parties, was intentional. The effect of that act, let's say it didn't cause any bodily injury, but it caused him pain. The victim gets to decide what level, whether it hurt them or not. Let's say he gets slapped, says it didn't hurt him. Let's say he said, turn me on, whatever. He gets to consent to that because that's what you do that's how you advocate for the victim. Now, the same slap causes him pain, it's still assault bodily injury, regardless of that person's intent. That's the whole reason why the law is written that way. So their intent for the consequence is irrelevant. My whole point of that is the act and the result's what's important, and whether the act was knowingly and intentionally. If she was falling down and slapped him in the face, sure. All day long, it won't fit the knowingly and intentionally aspect of it. That's my issue with this. And then on top of that, this now backup officer, not the primary officer, is saying, as an attorney for the suspect, well, it sounds to me, that's an assumption. That's a presumptive statement. It sounds to me like she didn't mean to hurt him, so clearly she can't. That's an opinion. That's not legal fact. That's not something that can be proven in the court of law, or if it was going to be proven, it would be done in a court of law and be judged upon by her peers or by a judge, not by an officer, and not by an attorney. It's the whole crux of the reason why we even did this video was this reason.
And because again, my biggest problem with it isn't necessarily that, hey, this is an officer trying to find a way to, maybe not ruin somebody's life or whatever, or something like that. It is the fact that this consideration typically is not given when you are not a 110-pound girl crying who looks like the victim in this situation when you're walking up. And that is the crux of the issue, is that I do not believe, and maybe, again, we're judging this based off of this one body cam video, after the fact, all of that stuff, but it just strikes me as incredibly unlikely that he goes this far to try to weasel out other suspects.
Sure.
It seems extremely unlikely that if the boyfriend was the one in the back of this patrol car, that he wouldn't be on his way to jail right now.
Yep.
That is my problem with it, is that it is an unequal application of the law by somebody whose job it is not to decide guilt or innocence. His job is just, like you said, decide probable cause, see, has there been a crime committed? Who do I think committed that crime?
That's it. What does the law say what I do about that?
What does the law say that I do about it? Do I have discretion? If the law says I don't have discretion, why am I looking for a way to make it give me discretion in this instance as compared to other instances?
And honestly, I don't think it has anything to do with his proficiency in the law. I don't think it has anything to do with training.
He's got great proficiency, which almost makes me more
very articulate. He knows exactly. That's my fears. He knows exactly what he's doing. This is clearly an experienced officer that knows what he's doing. That's my frustration with it. And again, it opens the door, and this is it. And I'll have this conversation because it was the same thing that happened post George Floyd. Regardless of what happened, you have an experienced officer that perpetrates something, whether lawful or not, it affects everyone. So the next time I have to make a hard decision that's really in the gray, instead of doing that with a history of all of these officers giving us examples of equal application of the law, I have instances like this that give ammunition to people that believe that every single cop is part of some systemically racist institution or something like that. And it's not that I believe that this officer has any malintent in this. It's not that you cannot argue against the fact that they are not advocating for the victim here, which is the guy.
They are trying to find him a hotel room. They are trying to keep them separated. Yeah. All of this is happening. But he's also trying really, 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 really hard to make sure this girl does not go to jail.
He's avoiding the charge that they know they have PC for. And that's my issue.
And that he has very clearly articulated he has. Yeah. He was very, very clear with both of them, honestly, that like he has this, he basically has her dead to rights. Pardon the phrasing there.
No, but I mean, ultimately, the same amount of scrutiny is going to be applied to him in this now murder investigation. Clearly, he's suspect numero uno. Whether this is a Gone Girl scenario or whatever, clearly he is suspect numero uno, and he deserves to be, given the history of all this kind of stuff. But you don't get to pick or treat people based off their past, based off of what you think they might do. You have to apply the law equally every single time, irregardless of someone's history or any predisposition you might have of that person. Regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of socioeconomic system, you need to, in the moment, if you have a crime, treat it all the same. And again, procedural justice was the phrase that I used earlier. It's important for this very reason. Because ultimately, we're all going to be criticized and critiqued based off the precedents that you set. It's why I believe that judges should be more careful about what they do with sentencing. You know, if two people under the same set of circumstances are given different punishments, when there's no other mitigating factors that are criminal in nature, there's a problem. And that's something that needs to be addressed. The same thing can be applied to law enforcement. Someone trying to punch me in the face, they're going to get slammed on the ground. Whether it's a 110-pound female or some crackhead. Doesn't matter. That crackhead could be a 110-pound female. It doesn't matter. I am applying whatever force or authority I have on that person based off the criteria of the situation, not the person. You can have the conversation about if they were in a mutual combat situation and he was a 6'5", 300-pound man, she's 110, whether she needed a baseball bat to defend herself and whether that baseball bat was reasonable, there's an argument. I totally understand that, but that's not the situation we have here. That's our frustration, I think, with it. We'll keep playing it and see how he articulates.
And we do want to reiterate, like, this is not an indictment of either of the people, the Gabby or Brian. I mean, that is a separate issue here. We are here to comment specifically on the behavior of law enforcement in this situation, regardless of whatever. This just happens to be a video that we saw and we're like, oh my God, this is like a very good example of some of the stuff we really want to talk about.
And honestly, I think the reason why this is important is because really this primary officer absolutely killed it in an investigation. I think both of these officers treated both of these people with respect. I think that they were very thorough in explaining themselves, detaining people. This was a very safe traffic stop. I think everything that happened here was by the book.
Aside from
it didn't
some very minor subtle things that I pointed out because obviously I knew what the end result this was going to happen because I pre-watched it. Like, this was a very good example of good policing. This was good law enforcement. There was a good investigation. There was good.
I think when you start to speculate on how to apply the law, or we start to speculate, and it's different when you're looking at constitutionality or something like that, I can understand that argument. Because again, you took an oath to a piece of paper that was the Constitution, not a law written by a lawmaker. That's why I understand that. But when you start to stretch the law, you're starting to do a disservice to yourself. And these guys, 110% had this thing dead to right, did the investigation correctly. It wasn't until they started reaching. And you can see this plain view doctrine. How far if I lean my head into somebody's car and I claim that was plain view, did I have reason to be inside of the car? Did I have reason to do whatever? The more you stretch on that, the more you start to betray really your job and your duty, and that's to keep people safe. You start to blur the line between a peace officer and why people claim that you're the Gestapo. That's where all of this now starts to become a national conversation. And this is really where you start to get yourself hemmed up. If this isn't straightforward, and not everything will be. I'm not saying, again, this isn't an indictment on either one of these officers. And again, we can't claim that, let's say they take her to jail, that she's going to be alive. We don't know that. For all we know, it delays it a week or whatever it is. All I'm saying is you now have what's potentially going to be viewed as an unequal application of the law that now gets national attention because of the side effect of what happened after that. If she would be back home right now, alive and well, nobody would have seen this body cam footage. Mm-mm. I don't even think a supervisor would have looked at this. They'd have been like, oh, okay, there was a report done here, whatever, he did a great job, he killed it. You don't get to pick when you make national news, and this is why this is such an important conversation to have. And it's really something that I think the law enforcement community needs to really talk about and work on, culturally speaking, but also like people need to be educated on it. This is how difficult and complicated this job becomes. Sometimes you have to be the bad guy and take the 110-pound girl to jail, despite the fact that everyone's going to think you're a dick for doing it, because potentially the side effect of your inaction is something bad that you could possibly not even fathom. There's no way they could have known how this was going to go down. And honestly, I can appreciate the mindset that this guy has trying to be an advocate, but that shouldn't change. Again, to me, it's corrupted by the idea that, let's say these roles were reversed. I don't think it's a huge assumption to make.
Not even a little.
And I don't think it's unfair to critique that, because there's plenty of times that I was given this scenario and that chick went to jail within 5 minutes. Maybe that makes me an asshole, but there's plenty of, I had times where they called me.
Yeah.
Where her character in this scenario calls me, says he's hitting me, he's XYZ, but the material evidence of it shows otherwise. I have witnesses that show otherwise. I might have a cell phone camera footage that shows otherwise, and it's just simply not. You have to go based off what you can prove, not what you feel like what happened, not like necessarily even what they say, because people can lie to you. This is a very hard place for these guys to have been, and they got the shortest of sticks to have possibly gotten on what really should be a completely irrelevant call, but here we are talking about it. And again, this is going to be...
But like you said, you don't get to pick when you make national news. And that's the big thing. It's like you always have to... It's like they always say, integrity is what you do when nobody's watching.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this is. Obviously, they're always being watched. They've got their body cams and all that stuff. But that's why you want to apply the same standard at all times. Because if you do that, when it does make national news, at the very least, you have the affirmative defense of, I did my job as I needed to do it, as in the most correct, and
I didn't treat the situation any differently based on
differently than any other. My record will show that every single situation that was similar to this, I did the exact same thing.
An example of this is what I used to do. Anytime I towed a car, I would inventory it. And I would inventory it to make sure if there was something valuable in there, we noted it. So in case the tow yard stole it or whatever, if there was like a really expensive purse or something like that, every once in a while, in a DWI investigation, I would be inventorying a car. And when doing that, I'd find a stolen gun. Well, I want to charge this guy with UCW. He didn't need to be stealing people's firearms, right? But if I just so happen to only inventory this guy's car, even if it's perfectly lawful, it wouldn't be a huge stretch of the imagination. All I got to do is poke a little hole in the integrity of my investigation, and this guy walks. This officer treated my client differently because of his race and ethnicity. And to 12 people sitting there that really could care less about law enforcement related things until now, all I need is for him to drive that idea home enough and be like, well, my defense attorney could turn around and say he inventories every car he deals with. Look at these, pulls out a stack of like 12,000 inventory slips. This is every single time Officer So has inventoried a car. This person's this ethnicity, this person's... You have some level of affirmative defense to that accusation. In this instance, you're hard pressed to see it. And I'm with you on that. But we'll play it and see.
It's your call. This is 100% your call.
This is the other thing that bothers me as well. Is he does this. He throws this grenade in the middle of the situation, and he's like, "It's on you, bro. Peace." And
the burden of making this call was on the primary officer. And it's ultimately, and again, it was still his decision to make. I don't want to just sit here and completely throw Mr. Beard under the bus. However, look at the primary officer situation now. I have what's possibly a more senior officer than me that I might very well respect. Why wouldn't I? This guy's super articulate. He knows exactly what he's talking about. He's very thorough in his investigation. He was easy, helpful. He showed up super fast for this traffic stop. What a cool guy. He might even have like a really good personal relationship with this guy. And he poked a hole in my PC. Am I going to say he's wrong? What if I don't know? Or what if, because this is in such a gray area, he's what tips me in the balance? If you are not willing to take responsibility for what happens in there, you shouldn't be putting input into this person's, unless you have a very legitimate reason to question the PC of the arrest.
If when he was talking to her by herself and this guy was over there interviewing the boyfriend, if he had found some information that was pertinent, that was important, that was like, oh no, he hit her back or whatever.
He made he made a stretch on a very small legal technicality. And it was clear based on everything else. It just wouldn't. If I was a defense attorney, this wouldn't be hard. This wouldn't be hard. And again, if I'm the public's probably going to complain about this because again, it's just hard. We'll keep playing this. I hate that he does that though.
Well, and it gets.
I'm going to poke a hole in it, but it's all on you. I was like, well, then why didn't you let me conduct the investigation?
Yeah, and it also the other problem is that this then gets spun into the bigger narrative of, well, why didn't they do something and arrest this guy who was clearly whatever or whatever, who was clearly manipulating her into whatever. And then the blame falls on this police department and on these two officers who, aside from like these couple of moments, did an absolutely admirable job here. They did everything by the book and exactly how they should have.
I would honestly argue this is better than most policing that I see.
Yeah.
This is probably, I don't know that I would have worked this any faster or more efficient or more professional. I really do. I don't want to condemn it, but and it's again, sometimes it's that small.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like we're sitting here nitpicking every second of this because we can.
Yeah.
Because that's that's literally what we do. That's this channel.
Yeah.
But like, again, this narrative now gets spun that this police department might somehow be responsible for what happened to this girl because of something that,
which I think is unfair. I'm gonna come out and say it. This should have no credence on the investigation that's occurring now.
Yeah. If they'd never even stopped this car, the same exact thing could happen. Exactly. Like it doesn't really make any difference.
And I argue, had they arrested her and done it the way that I said they wouldn't
exactly. Like the ultimate circumstances might not have changed by anything.
Yeah.
That's irrelevant to this. But again, because of certain aspects of this behavior, now you can call into question everything.
Yep.
And that's where we really want to talk. That's the kind of stuff we really want to talk about, and that's why we started this channel and all of that, is because we do think it's a little bit important to nitpick,
100%.
if only so that it's in the back of not only the officers' minds but also the public's mind. That every time you're watching one of these videos, this is the kind of thing that's going through the officers' heads. This is also the kind of thing you should be thinking about, of what's going on, what's happening. This is how you should be looking at these videos, not immediately going by, this is the narrative, this is what's being said over here, so I'm going to go into this with a colored perception of what happened into it. Because a lot of the comments that are under this video come in with the perception of what the officers did and what happened based off of
like they were going to know this
like they were going to know what was going to happen, right?
Yeah. The onus of what has occurred post this has nothing at all to do with this officers or this police department. Again, if someone from that police department happens to see this and happens to get this far in the video, I really think you guys are killing it. Kudos to y'all for outer vests. Y'all are awesome for that.
The beards.
And the beards. I want to give you a shout out for that. And again, I really think these guys exhibited themselves professionally. I think that their investigations were spot on. Their conclusions on the legality of what happened were spot on. It's that little sliver, man. And I get where it's coming from, and I understand, but you got to be self-aware enough to realize that this could come back on you. And I'm not saying that anybody's innocent of that. These guys are human. In that moment, again, maybe it reminds them of somebody. Maybe they there's so many things that go into this. But like if we look back, if they decide to look at you with a fine-tooth comb, every single domestic better look like this. Is all I'm getting at. And if it is, we all need to shut our mouths and give these guys a high five for being the most procedurally just dudes ever.
We'll send a merch.
I really, no, seriously. I will give it right now.
We'll probably send a merch anyway.
Yeah, I'll probably give them a shout out because they were really awesome. But like, and again,
like total wheels.
If you guys, if you can guys get in contact with them, I think these guys did a great job, and I wouldn't mind sending them a shirt and stuff like that. But
but it is our purpose. Like, it is the purpose of this channel to educate you guys as the general public about all of the nitpicky stuff.
Yeah,
because it is stuff that you will never get to see. It's stuff you'll never think about when you're watching any of these videos, and your conclusions about what you're seeing are going to be based heavily on the information you have. So we'd like to provide you with more.
And I kind of want to even bring up the fact that this was great training. These were great officers that worked a call perfectly safe. Everything was done the right way. And even though they decided to not, because ultimately the charge is irrelevant. Really, the fact that we're even talking about it, in the future, none of this matters because of the outcome. If the outcome was inevitable, none of this stuff matters. The conversation needs to be had because I know that a lot of people are going to talk about it. But even in the most ideal set of circumstances, y'all are left holding the bag. That's what I want you guys to realize about how law enforcement works. You can absolutely kill it. Let's even say this was the best case scenario for her. Weirdly enough, as hard as that is to imagine, like let's say in an alternate universe, this gets her to turn her life around. They kept her out of a bad situation. She was able to go back into nutrition, all this kind of stuff. You don't get to know the outcome when you're doing this kind of stuff. I really do think that this police department represents good hiring practices, good training, good experienced officers handling a call in a professional way. And the frustration with that is the problems that are being posed to law enforcement are that complicated that even under those sets of circumstances, you're still going to make national news. You're still going to have everyone nitpicking everything that you do. You're going to have people nitpicking things you couldn't even possibly imagine you need to be worried about. And this is the reason why people need to be more educated about what's going on in law enforcement, because they're going to sit there and say, well, what if they did this? What if lawfully they executed what they believed in their mind was the right thing to do? You know, I will agree that I'm a little annoyed that the backup officer went through all of the trouble of convincing him not to arrest her and then being like, yeah, dude, but deuces. Yeah. I don't have to write this report or explain why he didn't go to jail, but, you know, those are my 2 cents. And again, it's still on the officer to make his own decision. But that being said, I don't think a lot of people can fully appreciate how hard and complicated this job is. And we're 49 minutes in. He had 49 minutes to decide what to do and had like 3 other officers to talk to about it. Imagine trying to make that complicated of a decision in half a second. Let's say it happens upon them mid-fight. Who's my victim? Who's my suspect? What amount of force are they using? Do I need, let's say this person's getting stabbed in front of their house, and I got to figure out whether they're getting stabbed because they're kidnapping somebody. Like, it's impossibly complex, impossibly difficult to figure out in a short amount of time, and your feet are going to be held to the fire no matter what. And I think a lot of people don't understand or appreciate how complicated that is, and a lot of times when they pass judgment on this type of stuff, they do it without that understanding. When you watch an Olympic athlete fail, you realize they're failing against the best people in the world. You know what I mean? They're like, you got second place to Michael Phelps. Good job. You know.
Oh yeah.
Or again, in the circumstances with who's the gymnast?
Simone Biles.
Simone Biles. I'll never have to do what she did. I'll never be under the microscope that she was under, right? And a lot of people were like, yeah, given everything that she's got to go through. You had fighter pilots and all these people talking about all this stuff because of the level of complexity of the situation that she was in that we fully won't understand or appreciate. Try to maintain that level of objectivity when you're looking at situations like this, because this isn't even really misconduct. Ultimately, this is I disagree with the way the law was interpreted, but ultimately that's all it is. A judge, I can't tell you how many times the DA's office has disagreed with me, or my supervisors disagreed with me, or a judge has disagreed with me, and the Supreme Court's disagreed with you. A lawmaker will disagree with you on what the law should be. That's all part of this national conversation that we want to have about what we feel like in
a random camera guy will disagree with you.
Sure. That's not necessarily what's important here. It's really dissecting how super complicated this stuff is, and that it's not as easy a layup, even with hindsight. It's not as easy a layup as it is with how that situation.
Honestly, on our second watch compared to our first watch, and the conversation we had when we decided to make this video, there's been some changes after watching it the second time, because there was stuff we missed. There was stuff. On my first watch, I thought that he had said that she had keys in her hand. That was not the case. It was just I misheard when they were talking about the keys. She was trying to grab his key.
We have instant replay,
right? And we were able to go back and rewatch and whatever. And that's the thing, is like you can get. There's a lot of information, and especially in something like this, there's a lot of information coming at you. Yeah. And even when you can go back and rewatch and whatever, you're gonna miss stuff. So it's hard to feel right second guessing any of these decisions. But on the other hand, I think it's important to look at them the same way, you would watch game footage after a game.
Yeah.
It's like you need to learn from any possible mistakes. You need to know.
To get better, you need to evaluate.
Right.
They do it in sports. They should do it more often in court cases. They should do it more often. Because again, this doesn't begin and end with us. You can talk about things that are happening in the medical field right now. You can talk about things that are happening in schools right now. If you're not evaluating the results of your actions and whether the consequences were intentional or not, if you are not openly and honestly evaluating the consequences of it, you don't know how to get better at what you're doing. Everyone needs to get better. It's not just cops. People need to get better at doing clearly. Yes. People need to get better at doing stuff. Honestly, these two people, for being in a domestic and pretty pissed off, handled themselves and conducted themselves pretty well for being a soon-to-be murderer and somebody in a I don't know that. I'm not
potentially. I was about to say allegedly, not even allegedly, because he hasn't been charged yet.
We don't know yet. But all I'm saying is, given how agitated they were, and again, she was full of anxiety and things like that, handled themselves rather well, given that they were possibly looking at, being charged with a crime and having to sit in jail and all that stuff. It's just like we can all get better at what we're doing. And we're hoping to have fruitful conversation about this versus just conjecture and having zingers and all this kind of stuff.
And difficult conversations. Because I think, again, it's both easy to criticize and also kind of hard to criticize when you're in our position.
I will be the first person to say I've screwed up more than this guy has in this call. 100%. I have screwed up more than either one of those officers did on this call. Easy. Whether I was a rookie or whether I was all fired up about something, I have messed up. Every single cop has messed up. Every single person in any job has messed up way more. These guys are, and the consequences of that were worse, or they were in more control of those consequences. And none of them are. We're not having national conversations about all that kind of stuff. Again, you can look at what our politicians are doing today, what scientists are doing today. All of these, you can have a bigger conversation about this. But for us and only cops, the conversation is going to be obviously law enforcement centered.
She was striking him in the arm. Or he said that she was striking him in the arm. He said she was, and that's what caused him to hit the curb. She said that she got hurt. I might have this too mixed up, probably.
No, she said that too, but she started distracting him by hitting him. And then he probably looked at her, and that's why the mark found the underneath. And she said it was her fault that she was distracting him by hitting him. But she said she didn't try to hurt him, it wasn't malicious. She thought that he wasn't listening to her.
So assault is an attempt with unlawful force or violence to do bodily injury to another. The code for bodily injury, the definition says, bodily injury is infliction of pain or physical impairment or illness.
Say a cut.
So you can go. Now I'm recording, and society and the judges and everyone can judge me for this.
This is where we got permission.
I'm looking at a 110-pound female and her fiance who have no means to be separated. He doesn't want to pursue it. She's not a threat to him, more than slight abrasions from her fingernails. I don't care if we use the actual letter of the law to not charge, but I also don't care because it literally does possibly make perfect sense to go.
And that is how great it is. Based on the argument he's posing, that's how great it is. I don't agree with the argument, but
right. And then this gets muted, so we don't know what they say here.
Yeah. My guess on this is that I really think the whole conversation is really geared around the interpretation, because they're trying to interpret the law. Because it's conjecture at this point. I mean, either he's right and that's a legitimate way to question PC for the arrest, or it's not. My conclusion is it's not. But I don't have years of experience prosecuting Utah. In Texas, it would not fly.
Yeah.
But our law is worded very differently. We just need BI. It's pain or some sort of visible bodily injury. When I read the law myself, it didn't specifically articulate visible bodily injury. So that could be a valid argument.
A little bit more discretionary there than it is here.
Yeah, Texas, there's ain't no discretion in domestics. They were very adamant about that. And I give him props for at least acknowledging how gray it was. It's not like he walked off and was like, "Oh, you're an idiot if you disagree with me." I think that he did articulate that it was gray. The area that he was in was gray, and that he could be completely wrong. but that was his call. And again, he did technically leave it up to the primary officer. I don't think he used any pressure. I think he hinted at it. I think he might have used some passive pressure to try to convince that officer, again, because he was making the argument. He did do a secondary line of questioning to try to figure out intent and whether intent was important when it comes to that. But
he didn't have to go look that up at all. Exactly. Like there was literally no
he was convinced
than when he says the words 110-pound female, that was where it solidified for me that this is probably a very specifically this is his mindset. And again, we're trying to mind read over here,
but I mean, at the end of the day, that is where you're going to get hemmed up for possible bias. That is where you're going to get hemmed up in civil court. That's where you're going to get hemmed up in criminal court, where they're going to try to prove bias on you to try to discount your investigation. And that's something that you have to be super conscientious of.
And not just for this case either. This could be used against him in future cases.
Yep.
Because again, he very specifically said the words 110-pound female.
Yeah.
And that's essentially why he thinks that this is something that they should just let go.
Yep.
And that they should use their discretion for.
Yeah.
That is his reasoning. And that is where I have a big problem with it.
Yeah.
That is honestly, that's pretty much the only thing I have a really big problem with here. Is that is both how he approached the situation in the beginning, and it felt to me, and this is purely subjective, but it felt to me like he was looking for a way to pin this on the boyfriend. And I'm sure the comments will go wild about well, it's his fault, whatever. Okay, great. Talk about that somewhere else.
Yeah.
Specifically, when we're talking about this officer's actions, that's where I got the idea originally, was that he looked like he was trying to pin it on the boyfriend when he couldn't. He then tried to find a way to let the girl off. And that is then solidified by this statement here. And that's where I think this is the law being unevenly applied, specifically because of who your suspect is.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is, as you said, procedurally unjust.
Yeah, and I think that's where the argument lies. It's not necessarily misconduct. It's an uneven application of the law.
Right.
And that's implicitly what people's biggest complaint is in national news about law enforcement. So it's why we have to be careful about these things. And it's why...
And that's not to say the discretion is not important. Discretion is very, very important as well. There are certain things that, again, if you're caught with an ounce of weed, why are you being put in jail for it?
There are instances where I would agree with this. Given the circumstances of what's happening, I can't. And again, that would have been my discretion at the time, and it is within the way that it's written, and I still would be a champion for officer discretion 110% of the time. I quite frankly, as someone that experienced it on the back end, did not like when discretion was taken from me, because I did feel like I was unnecessarily victimizing people, or again, giving a punishment that I didn't feel was appropriate. And again, I don't get to be the judge of that. That's for everybody else to vote on. But I could see maybe on a smaller level, on a micro level, why that law wasn't appropriate, or why the spirit of that law might not have been appropriate. And I saw examples of where I felt that the wording in a law was abused, and whether it was because somebody was being an asshole or whatever it was, and it's just not an ethical way to do it. I don't think law enforcement should be subjected to that. And in the same way, like I said, I don't want anything to happen to these officers. I don't think.
Y'all leave them alone.
Yeah, at this point. Again, the onus of what occurs after this is on the people involved in this, and I don't want to sit there and say that this guy wasn't a victim of domestic violence. I don't want to act like he maybe didn't perpetrate domestic violence onto her himself. I don't want to sit there. We're not making judgments on anybody here.
Right.
We're having the conversation of it's just such a hard thing.
Right. Ultimately, this could have been any two people.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't change.
My conversation would be the same.
It wouldn't change how it was. It just so happens, again, this is national news. Yeah. And therefore, these officers in this department are getting hammered about it.
And I both want to give fair consideration to the officers, given that they didn't know, in hindsight, what would come out of this. And at the same time, I think a lot of people's criticisms of this are going to be dumb and ignorant. And they're going to be like, well, they should have done... should have and could have, and all of that stuff's irrelevant because we weren't tasked. Honestly, it wasn't our responsibility to do. If we cared enough to do it, I'd have their job. I'd be wearing that uniform. I'd be stuck outside in the hot sun in the middle of the desert doing this, but I'm not. So who am I to complain? So I want...
This is an educational play-by-play.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
Yeah.
This is meant to give you better tools to analyze this video and other types of videos and the way that people are talking about this and what the conversation is and what the narrative is.
Yeah.
That is the purpose of this, to give you those tools.
Yeah.
Aside from that, don't draw any further conclusions from this about anybody's guilt, innocence, whatever.
Yeah. And
this is specific. This is informational. This is purely to give you the tools to do some critical thinking about when you see similar situations.
And honestly, like it's, we're talking about something being egregious or not. Like in one instance, you get people that are like, you need deviation from the laws and egregious, whatever. And again, if it is, let's say it was some teenage kid with a little bit of weed or whatever, and I take him to jail and he joins a gang and all these terrible things happen, you know, or I let that kid go. And because I let this kid go, I empower him to go join a gang and get killed. And there's no way to know. Hey, you're just kind of left doing it by the seat of your pants. And I understand that because I got to experience that. But if you made it this far in our super long analysis, is there anything else you wanted in this video?
No, that was really the last thing that I wanted to say. So conclusion is, they find this dude at a hotel. They find her. They give her the van, and then she leaves. And
I don't think charges were pressed here.
And no charges were pressed. They were basically let go. Essentially, there was nothing criminal found, I guess, in this.
So just kind of looking out on how a charge would have actually possibly benefited this situation is with pressing the charge, in certain circumstances, there's an automatic no contact or there's an application for an automatic no contact. We don't know the details of what happened after this. We might never know the details of what happened after this. But if you're in a contentious relationship, please seek help and please get advocacy. I don't care what your sex, denomination, religion, whatever it is. If you're in a bad situation, try to leave it. If you can't leave it, try to start making steps to trying to leave it, or at least get help or advocacy, or let somebody know. The whole reason why a lot of this stuff is non-discretionary for a reason is that, let's say the judge reads this, because it actually gets to a judge, and it actually gets to the DA's office, it actually gets to all this stuff, and they're like, given y'all's history and given the situation, I'm going to go ahead and do a 30-day emergency protective order. At the very minimum, right now, he would have been in violation of that if any contact happened after that. And you could have at least applied for a warrant to try to find this guy or had the legal means to try to find this guy based on that violation of protective order. There might have been questions as to why they were together if there was this protective order in place and stuff. That's the whole purpose of that, is to prevent possible future violence. That's kind of why applying the law sometimes is better than not applying it. But again, that's a whole different conversation.
The nature of abusive relationships also leads to a point where a lot of times the victim they won't want to press charges. They won't want to follow through with it. That's why it's not discretionary, because a lot of times, because they're being abused, psychologically they are in this trap, in this cycle. And so they can't leave. They can't. They continue to seek out. It's kind of like an addictive cycle. And so you're essentially physically addicted to a person. And it becomes really problematic, especially in law enforcement, when you need somebody to testify or when you need somebody's consent in order to be able to do anything about the person abusing them. So that's why a lot of times it's not discretionary.
I think it's important. I watch a lot of these domestics escalate into really terrible situations where, again, and it's not because they're dumb, it's not because of Stockholm Syndrome. These are when you talk about domestics in general, it's a way more complicated issue than just, they're being assholes wanting to get out of the situation. There's economic reasons as to why sometimes they can't. There's, again, maybe they have no other support system but this person and they're afraid to leave that. And they can justify the abuse that they're sustaining. You shouldn't be gaslighting anybody's
lived experience.
You know, you can't know from the outside looking in. But I do believe there is a moral responsibility and a legal one that's precedented by law into us intervening. The same way if somebody's having an acute mental episode where they're, having some level of distress. I can see the utility of allowing law enforcement to step in there. And there's a whole other conversation that we'll probably have about that.
We're going to have a lot more of these conversations.
So this is, if you made it this far, thank you. If you guys like this, give us other suggestions on stuff you want us to kind of analyze. We're going to try to bring on other subject matter experts for this. We have merch. We'll link it somewhere in there. You can go buy shirts if you want it. And like I said, in the comment section, what did you guys think about the situation? Try to be constructive, please.
Yes, try to have proper, good discussion. Don't just
sure.
throw hate out.
I guess you can shit post if you want. I don't care.
I mean, yeah, you can.
Yeah, but at the end of the day,
your comments,
we want to have a fruitful conversation about this. We still have skits. Check out our TikTok. We have a bunch of funny skits on there.
Yep.
We're going to be starting a Patreon if we haven't started it already, and we're hoping to come out with some more content after this. So like, comment, subscribe, and follow.
Trying to be a real hypocrite here and just dunk on Beardy Cop one more time, just because of the when he just like drives off in his
he deuces. He literally
he deuces out.
Hey,
I can't find
hey
it.
man,
But
hey man, hope this doesn't have any negative repercussions. Bye.
Like, just like drives off.
Yeah.
Like, I know. I'm
So,
a total hypocrite.
hopefully my video.
Be nice to Beardy Cop.
My video has no negative repercussions on society. Bye.
Be nice to Beardy Cop.
Yeah, be nice to all these guys. They're doing a job that I quit because I didn't want to do it anymore, and I respect these guys for still wanting to put
Specifically so
themselves
that
out
jerks
there.
like us wouldn't criticize.
100%. Yeah, I left so I could criticize people and be completely immune to the effects of that criticism.
That's right.
So, anyways, thank you for riding 2-man with us, and hopefully Gil will be back for the next one of these that we do. And then until next time, peace.
Peace.